Hi, Travis. Hi, Erin.
Hey.
How
Hello.
are you guys?
Oh,
Doing
good.
well.
Good. Just waiting for Amy, and I'll join you up on camera as well. So give me just a minute. Okay, there we go. There's three of us. So we'll just wait for Amy, and then we'll get started. So how are you guys doing?
Great.
Good. We're
Doing
very
well.
excited to talk to you today.
Thanks. So is everybody, do people, there's a Q&A section. How do we see that?
Yeah. So we kind of monitor the Q&A, so you don't have to worry about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we'll help. So what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce you guys, then I'm going to jump off screen and leave it to you guys to converse. But we'll be monitoring the Q&A part, and then we can open it up for people to jump on stage with you and ask questions. So people will be joining us in the live audience below, which you can see, but there's also our public profile page, so they can just log on to any computer and see that. You won't see them in the audience, I don't think. So we have kind of two audiences that'll be listening in.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm fine to take kind of questions whenever. I think if people have questions, it'll sort of help drive the conversation to things that people want to know about.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
I think that the three of us have a lot of different experience in a vast array of things within the
Yeah.
audiobook world. I think we'd be happy to talk about whatever people want to hear about.
Great.
Yeah.
That's good to know. And we'll announce that when we're getting ready to get started. So
Okay.
where are you guys joining us from?
I'm up in Eastern Washington, Spokane.
Oh, okay.
West Coast.
And Erin?
I'm in LA.
Oh, LA. Okay. We're in San Diego, so we're all West Coasters.
Yes.
And I don't know where
Amy
Amy's
just
joining
texted
us.
me and said, "Do you see me?" And I'm going to tell her, no, I don't. I don't.
No, we don't see her.
If I close the app out to text her back, will it log me out? Well, maybe I won't. I'll do it from my computer. Hold on.
Okay.
I'll text her.
Sounds good. So if you're in our audience, welcome. Just give us a few minutes. We're helping Amy log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, now I see her.
Here.
Oh, you do?
So that is an Amy. I hope it's the right Amy. Yes. All right. I'm going to invite you up on stage, Amy. And we'll see if that works.
Hello.
There she is. Hi, Amy. You made it.
How's it going?
Yeah.
Nice
Well,
to
we're glad
see
you're
you all.
here.
I was on this on my computer, but for some reason it wouldn't let me totally connect. Is it only a phone app?
It's a phone
Yes.
app and an iPad app for all devices, just for the panelists. So anybody can join us from computers to attend the program. It's just the panelists have that limitation.
And you mentioned that you were going to just sort of let us take it away, but I'm not 100% sure what you're expecting from this. If nobody's going to be asking questions, like where do you want us to go with this?
Yeah, well, I think Erin and Travis have that figured out. So we'll go with them. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan Macbeth, and I'm especially excited for today's show because for the first time ever, we're speaking with audiobook narrators. This is the first in a 5-part series focused on audiobook narrators, authors, and production. So before I introduce Amy, Erin, and Travis, I'd like to welcome those of you who are in our virtual audience listening in through our public profile page or live listening. There's a little Q&A tab on your screen, which you can see, so you can type in your questions anytime if you're dying to know about the audiobook world, and especially today's topic, which is audiobook production. You can type in your questions, and if you mention that you want to come up on screen, let me know, and I can invite you up, and you can ask your questions live as well. We're planning about a 45-minute chat today. It's intended as a conversation between the three panelists, but also the audience members, so we encourage that. I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then I will leave it to them to take it away. Erin Spencer is the owner and executive producer at One Night Stand Studios, an audiobook production company based in Los Angeles, California. A passionate and accomplished storyteller, Erin's love of the arts has been nurtured across her 20-year career in entertainment. You look too young to have a 20-year career in entertainment. From screen to stage to voicing over 400 audiobooks, Erin continues to seek meaningful ways to connect with audiences. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
And next we have Amy. Is it Rubinate?
Rubinate.
Rubinate is an award-winning audiobook director, producer, and narrator. Her Los Angeles-based production company, Mosaic Audio, has recorded and produced nearly 3,000 audiobooks for major publishers. Amazing. Amy casts and directs hundreds of books a year, specializing in directing authors and celebrities. She received her MFA in writing for children and young adults from Hamline University, and her first middle grade graphic novel, Kate and the City of Fire, will be released this year. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here. Travis Baldree is a full-time audiobook narrator who has lent his voice to hundreds of stories. Before that, he spent decades designing and building video games like Torchlight, Rebel Galaxy, and Fate. He also writes books and is the author of Legends and Lattes, a low-stake, cozy fantasy novel. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his very patient family and their small, nervous dog. And welcome, Travis.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you all three here today to discuss audiobook production. So maybe you guys could take it away by explaining a little bit about what it takes to produce an audiobook from start to finish. I know there's a lot involved, but the three of you guys are clearly experts on that. So I'm going to leave the stage and let you guys take it away from here.
Great, thanks. Amy, do you want to start kind of about just launch us off?
Sure. One of the things to consider is that we're all coming from different sort of angles in the industry. So my company almost solely works for the traditional publishers and a few indie publishers. I know that Erin's is focusing on authors. And Travis, what is your focus?
Largely indies and small press. You know,
Okay.
that's the bulk of my work. So yeah, very different angles on all that.
So we're doing a few different things. So for me, and please guys cut me off if you're ready to move on to the next thing. For me, so the book is generated by the publisher. They'll say either, hi, can you record so-and-so next week on Tuesday? And we'll say, yeah. And then they come in and they record with us. And we usually do punch recording, which means it sort of, they play you in from your own mistake as a narrator. So it's kind of, it ends up being kind of a pre-edited recording. It's pretty much the industry standard now to do punch-in method of recording. And it just makes things quicker for everybody. And I find as a narrator that it actually keeps me on task much easier than if I were not being guided in by my own voice and, you know, right before my last mistake. So we have engineers in studio. We have studios, several studios, multiple. We were up to 6 and then we had some flooding. Now we're getting back up to 6. It's been a little bit interesting weather this year. So primarily we're located in the Valley, Burbank and Sherman Oaks, and possibly a new studio in Universal now. And so they'll come in, our engineers will direct them. Sometimes there's a dedicated director in addition to the engineer. Then it goes either to the publisher who handles the post-production, or it goes through our post team. And what that means is we do a traditional method of post, which is it goes to an editor who does a fine edit, meaning they might find 800 to 3,000 little tiny things to tweak. And they also do a proofing run where they catch mistakes that maybe we missed in the studio. Then it goes on to a proofreader who follows what the editor has done, makes sure there's no weird thumps or bad edits or additional mistakes that maybe the editor didn't catch. Then it goes to pickups, which are corrections. The narrator will come in and maybe make a few corrections, and then it's mastered, and then we deliver it to the client, usually WAV files, but occasionally they just want MP3s to put up on digital. And that's really a process. There's a few additional steps, like, for example, when I direct, a lot of times I'm directing authors and celebrities. And they may be at the very top of their game in their field, but haven't really done audiobooks yet. And it's a really particular different world. And some people take to it easily and some people don't. And so a lot of times they need quite a bit of guidance going through. And then one more additional thing that we handle is casting. And that's something that I have loved doing for years. It's one of my greatest joys, providing work for people and union work, and to kind of make their day with a good book. And I figure if the narrator has a good week, the audience is going to have a good week listening. And audiobooks have brought me a lot of joy over the years, so I'm really happy to bring that to others. That's kind of us in a nutshell. And my company's called Mosaic Audio.
I think so. I work directly with authors. So I actually do a lot of Zooms all week with authors. Either mostly new authors, not new authors, but new to me authors, new to my business authors. But so I work with authors. I'm really taking authors that own the rights to their audio, and a lot of them are indie authors. And I really just take audio off their plate. Authors are making, besides just the writing, indie authors are making a lot of decisions, for their books' life, their covers and editors and maintaining social media presence and all the things that indie authors do to have a successful book launch or just a successful career. And audiobooks seem to be daunting because it's just a whole other thing, and they don't know about it. So I Zoom with authors pretty regularly. I don't give them a huge overview of the process because they just sort of don't need to know. I'm really more like, we'll take care of this for you. Here's what we do, and here's the kind. We do everything from casting to the very final delivering retail ready files, and really try and make it easy for authors while giving them some creative control, so they do have a say in casting. We look at their books, and sometimes a book requires or could benefit from something different. Who knows? Maybe it should be an audio drama. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it should just be a single narrator, and that's perfect. But we try and really curate the audio to be the best version of the book that we can make it. So, yeah, that's pretty much what we do. What about you, Travis?
So one of the things that's kind of cool about audiobooks and audiobook production overall is that in a lot of ways it kind of reflects what's happened with books. The fact that kind of the sort of like the stink of indie publishing has largely evaporated at this point, and there are a lot of really successful indie authors who do really good business, really know what they're up to. And then, of course, you have traditional on the other end of the spectrum. And then a lot of authors that actually bounce between them. There's a lot of authors that are hybrid authors now, and they'll have one book that's traditionally published and then one book for them that's self-published because they can put those out fast. They might not have to get a publisher on board. So there's this great, really interesting spectrum. And I think it's reflected largely in audiobooks, both in how authors choose to produce them and in how they get produced. So Amy's on kind of like the more traditional end of the spectrum, where you've got multiple studios and people are coming in and you've got a lot of high profile traditionally published books. And I'm probably on the far other extreme, where I basically function almost totally as a production entity myself. So I have one person that works with me who is basically a full-time proofer. But authors or small pubs or some of the mid-sized pubs, and occasionally I'll do like a big 5 book, but it's relatively rare. I think I have been directed in a session a total of maybe 30 minutes in I don't know how many thousands of hours of audio. That's just not the way that I have normally produced books, because I'm coming at it at this very odd end of the spectrum. Well, maybe not so odd anymore. So for me, how it usually works is that authors or studios will come to me and say, hey, we've got a book. Do you want to do it? And if the spot on my schedule fits for them, I put them on the schedule and it'll go into production when I get to it. And I have a very I'm going to call it an indie, a very tight kind of indie sort of turnaround for books, because they don't tend to have the lead time that a traditionally published book would. Normally, a traditionally published book is done a year before it's actually released, or more, because they have so many things to marshal. They've got the print run to get together, they've got the audio to do, they've got an ad campaign to do, and they also have like release slots for the books. Indies don't tend to function that way. They write it, they finish it, they edit it, and probably 2 to 3 days later, it's up on Amazon. So their production timelines are very, very different. So for me, end to end producing a book, from getting the script to narrating it to having it mastered, proofed, edited, and live, is often as little as 2 weeks. So it's a very fast turnaround, which is a little weird. But a lot of the authors in the genres that I work in have very fast release strategies for their indie books. So they'll do, for instance, 3 books in a series, and they'll release them one a month for 3 months to get a series established. And then they might do as many as 3 and sometimes 4 books a year in that series. So it's this really fast churn. So the way that I produce books is a little different. Obviously, I'm not going into I'm sitting in my studio. It weighs about 1.5 tons. It's called this is called the Studio Bricks. I love it very much. In fact, I come in here even when I don't have to record things because I love it so much. It's quiet. And I'll get a script, I'll record it. I'm a super nerd. I've written custom software that actually lets me edit audio as I record. So I have something called a spectral view, which various software packages have, that lets you see the audio spectrum for a WAV file, like as you're recording it. And if you've done this for a long time, you can actually recognize sounds in it. So I know what the sound of like a nose squeak looks like in a spectral view. And I have a little brush and I can just paint it out in a couple of seconds. And so what I'll do is I'll record the entire book. Once I have finished it, I'm doing a punch and roll in the same way that Amy's talking about, which is a system where if you've made a mistake, you roll back to a point before that mistake, you set your playhead, and it gives you a little bit of a roll in with what you've said for a few seconds prior. And then when you start narrating, it just smoothly blends it. So at the end, you have the theoretically error-free contiguous audio for the narration of a chapter. It's never error-free. You always messed something up. But I'll record. Once I have finished a book, I'll send it off to my proofer. I use the same proofer for every book. So she does 5 or 6 books for me a month, and she'll get it back to me in maybe 5 or 6 days. Once I get it back, I'll get pickups the same as any other narrator would for the mistakes that I made, transpositions of words, mispronunciations, something that I just garbled. And then I'll do the pickups at that time. My process is a little... it's got a few steps that are slightly out of order to a more traditional audiobook process. I, for instance, master all of the audio before I send it out for proofing, because a certain amount of errors and like things like low-level noise will get filtered out that my proofer then doesn't have to mark. And I have kind of a shortcutted system so that when I do pickups, because I am the same person in the same booth with the same equipment, I have a button where I can immediately remaster my pickups so that they perfectly match what I would normally record, and I can insert them, and it removes a lot of kind of false positives from the editing process. And then I'm basically done. Once those pickups are done, I pass it off to the author, or I upload it on their behalf to ACX, largely for most of the productions that I do. I guess I'll get into that real quick. So there's a couple ways that audiobooks can be published. In the traditional world, they usually have their own agreements, like Macmillan or Penguin or whoever will have their own agreements with Audible and all of the other vendors to distribute their audio and their own systems for doing so. On the indie end, most of them go through a service that's called ACX that Amazon and Audible operate, which was originally conceived as a way for indie authors or small pubs to set their audiobooks up for audition. And then an independent narrator would audition for that. They would agree. The audiobook would be produced, and then it would facilitate the publishing to Audible and iTunes and whatever other outlets they agreed to publish it to. This has kind of evolved in a lot of ways where the auditioning doesn't happen quite so much anymore, but it's used as a publishing mechanism for indies. So they won't even put a book up for audition on the service. They'll simply produce it with whatever narrator they chose. They'll take their finished audio there, and they'll just use it as a way to upload and distribute the audio. Because as far as that goes, it's more or less the best terms that most people are going to get as an indie or a small pub to get their audio distributed and get a reasonable royalty. And I probably have talked enough.
May I add a couple of things to that? Is there time for that?
I hope
Yeah.
so.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things that I should mention, in addition to what Travis is telling you, is that you can do exclusive or you can do wide with Audible. And so if you only want to put it on that platform, that would be exclusive. And if you want to go wide, meaning you're with them and you're with others, that is also an option. And then there are other ways to do it as well now that are becoming more common, like maybe Erin can tell you some of them. I don't really work
about the distribution platforms.
Yeah, like what is it?
Yeah,
Audible
there's
something?
Findaway. A lot of authors use Findaway. There's Authors Republic, Zebralution or Zebralation, one of the two. Those are the three that come to mind.
Oh, and the other thing I was going to add, I can't remember which of you was mentioning the timelines, but if you have sold your rights to a traditional publisher or audio publisher, your audio rights, and have not retained them, and then they make an audiobook out of it, it's good to know that they will be doing that anywhere from 6 months to a month out usually. The goal is to get a simultaneous release so that it's all coming out at once, and any kind of bump you get from reviews or advertising or word of mouth will also benefit the audiobook. But a lot of people, I think authors are surprised sometimes when they say, oh, I should think about getting a narrator. And the publisher's like, it's already in the can. So that's something for you guys to think about is if you've sold the rights, do you have, say, like first right of refusal of the narrator? Do you have any say? If you do, I often recommend that you really trust the industry professionals that are casting or giving casting options to you, because a lot of times, like say I'm casting something for one of the big 5 publishers, let's say. I will be keeping in mind things like who's the best vocal fit, who's the best interpretive fit for your book, but also do the people that I'm considering have a good platform? Do they have a fan base? Are they on social media? Are they likely to get a professional review? And so a lot of times when I see that authors are getting a little bit blindsided by suddenly getting thrust into the middle of the traditional publishing system, I say, relax just a little bit, because you're probably in very good hands, and they've given you at least one person that you're going to fall in love with. And don't worry too much, because they're also wanting somebody that's really going to deliver on that book on a number of levels. And so you may have a collaborative role, you may not have a collaborative role, but generally everybody's looking to do the highest quality of work possible for you. So
I also wanted to add, as far as timelines as well, I feel like a lot of authors, I don't know if we have authors in this group, but assuming we might, a lot of indie authors are starting to want a simultaneous release for their books. So like right now we have books even scheduled for 2024. Because authors are wanting maybe a certain narrator and they're wanting simultaneous release. I mean, I have untitled, author, approximately 80,000 words, but, manuscript date delivery, I've got that. So indie authors are so organized, and the ones that are really career ones, they're so organized and are really starting to plan ahead because they're seeing the benefit and the value monetarily of having a simultaneous audio release with their other book versions. So I feel like people really are scheduling in advance. For us, it takes like 4 to 6 weeks to get the audiobook done. Generally speaking, we're using multiple narrators on books. I just see that happening. Just the books that we're doing have, not always, but two narrators seem to be the thing, multiple first person point of views. So wrangling narrator schedules and post-production, 4 weeks, 6 weeks tops. And then of course we do a lot of backlist too. I find authors they're really seeing, I do go to a lot of author signing events, and I just do panels and things. And one author told someone on a panel, they were like, if you don't have your book in audio, you're leaving money on the table. There are some authors that 50% of their books income comes from their audio. Because really the return per unit on audio is higher than any other unit of your book sale. That's not always the case. That's not a blanket statement. Some people make no money on their audio. So, I don't want to there's no promises in any of it, but there's a lot of authors that are really seeing the value of audio, and they're starting to understand that, getting with the program on their schedule really impacts their sales. And of course, they're starting to do backlist. I think there was one author, we did 30 titles last year for her that were all backlist, because she's like, I want everything in audio. I want to get it in audio.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bunch of ways to slice it as far as scheduling. But I always say if you can do a simultaneous release, unless, like Travis was saying, they're done 4 days later, it's for sale. Okay. Obviously we're not going to do a simultaneous release there, but if there's enough planning and scheduling, I say try and do a simultaneous release if you can.
Yeah. There's a lot of value to it. And I do work with authors that also do that as well. And they're like the really organized ones that have kind of planned for this for a long ways out and have been doing it for a while. If there's a couple questions I get often from indies about that when I'm working with people who are either just getting into audiobooks or are just getting to a point where they can schedule things and aren't kind of flying by the seat of their pants. One of the questions is always, how do I get in touch with a narrator? Because a lot of indies are coming directly for a narrator, and they're not going through. Some of them have actually gone through like a publisher for a while, and they've decided that they want to keep more of the pie for themselves. They've established themselves. They have a war chest at this point. They want to fund their own audio and put it out there. And a lot of them ask about how to get a hold of a narrator, and the answer is you can just email them. They usually don't function through agents. A lot of people seem to think that they do. And I'm sure there are probably some narrators that do, and traditional actors who do narration who do that, but the vast majority don't. And if they've got a website, they've got an email address on it, just email them. And email them in advance, because if they're in demand, they will be scheduled out. But yeah, just email them, find out what their rate is, tell them how long your book is and what it's like. And narrators are nice people. The other is about pre-orders as an indie, which or a scheduled release. And there was a time where you could not do that through ACX or any of the other services, I don't think. Recently, that's changed, but you still have to have a certain amount of lead time. I believe they require, I can't remember the exact time. I want to say it's like 20 business days, and the audio has already been uploaded to the service. But if you do have the lead time to do, and you do want to schedule a simultaneous release on some of these services like ACX, you can. It just takes, again, some forethought.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt just for a minute? I just want to remind the audience that you guys can ask questions of our three panelists. And to do that, there's a little Q&A button. It takes you right to the React button. So you can click on either one of those. You have to press an emoji on the React, any emoji you want. And then there's a section at the bottom of that screen where you can type in your question. And we are monitoring that so we can ask your questions. If you are in our live virtual audience, you can click on the little circle to the lower left-hand corner of your screen and invite yourself up on stage to ask a question. For example, I see that Chris just invited himself up on stage and has a question for you guys. So you can either type it in and we'll read it for you, or you can join us on stage as Chris has just done. So welcome, Chris. Did you have a question or comment for our panelists?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Chris Rossetti here in San Francisco. Great broadcast, great information. Thank you all for doing this. My question basically is this: with the advent of AI, have we seen any audiobooks going straight to AI? I'm just curious, is that happening yet? Thank you.
I mean, there definitely have been some attempts, some that have gone live and been removed. I think there's probably a certain small percentage that are out there that just persist. Usually, I think those are done indie, and they're kind of sneaking them by, because as far as I know, Audible still has a policy that they don't publish AI narrated audiobooks. And since that's the lion's share of audiobooks, I think it's limited. Obviously, there's other things like Apple just introduced their service, which is separate from normal audiobooks for AI narrated books that are sold differently, and but
Google has
obviously
it
it's
too.
around.
Google has too. They have some AI narrated books. But yeah, Travis is right. I mean, the day that Audible allows AI narrated books is going to be kind of a game changer. But I'm actually not worried about it. I don't care. I mean, I care, but I'm not worried about it. I don't spend my time worrying about it. I just keep doing what I'm doing. I've pivoted so many times in my life that I figure like, well, if this happens, if this takes over and AI takes over, then, I just, what's next? But I also, it's, someone said the other day, they're like, why does AI have to come for artists? Why can't they just have AI to cook dinner and clean
Seems to be the
toilets?
boring
Like,
thing.
why do they have to come for artists? And it's so true. Just leave the artists alone. But I actually don't lose any sleep over AI or worry about it at all.
Well, remember that AI is not understanding subtext. There was some example. I was listening to an audiobook the other day and I was like, this is the perfect example. It was something along the lines of something very straightforward, right? It was like, and then she invited his mother over for dinner. But the narrator said, and then she invited his mother over for dinner. And you knew exactly how she felt about his mother and what their relationship was from her tone of voice. And that was accurately reflecting the context and the story. It's something that AI would not have known to do. And on such a tiny thing, but such a fundamental level, it's not necessarily serving the goal of your book, which is to tell a persuasive story. There were a couple tiny little things I wanted to add. I keep hearing things and going, ooh, and I think it's that improv background. Yes, and one of the things that Erin said about the money available in audiobooks and that you're losing it by leaving it on the table is that I think it's for like a dozen years now, or 10 years at least, that audiobooks have been the fastest growing branch of publishing. And so it's something to really consider. It is a way to maximize your audience base too, because sometimes they will follow a particularly popular narrator, or they will want to hear a narrator throughout the series. And or perhaps you have people who only listen. Like, I don't read books very often. Well, when I'm not getting paid for it, for fun, I listen, when I'm driving around or doing the dishes or walking the dog. And so you might be not just leaving money on the table, but leaving audience on the table. And there was another thing I was going to say about multicast or dual narration. It's something to consider when you're thinking about how many narrators you want, and of course your producer or your publisher can guide you in this. But one of the things that Erin was mentioning is that there are a lot of dual point of view books now. And I think sometimes those are genre based. So that is for sure the norm now, or there's more of that in romance, but say sci-fi might just be a single first person narrator or a single third person narrator. And I mean narrator by the teller of the story inside the book, not us reading the book aloud. It applies to two things. But one of the things I'm seeing is a trend toward third person dual point of view, where it follows the woman, then it follows the man, or it follows the dog and then follows the robot. And there is a growing trend toward having dual narrators on those. I'm not convinced that is the optimal way to do it. I think there's a lot of times when you can have the same narrator with the continuity of the story and the ideas saying, for the female part, and then she watched him walk out the door. The next morning, he wondered where she'd gone. I'm not really doing a guy voice. I'm doing his and hers attitudes. And there's a way to keep it with one narrator that you can kind of use the inflection or the point of view of the different storytellers within the story, that you don't necessarily have to have two people. But in first person, you pretty much do at this point.
I wanted to say two more things about AI. One is, narrators have a huge value add, even in just the fact that they have followings. It's like you want Brad Pitt on your movie, and you're like, because people love Brad Pitt and they don't know anything about this movie or the screenplay or, nothing. They're the director, but they're like, we love Brad Pitt, so it sells. Sometimes that happens with audiobooks too. People love, Travis, and they'll buy anything that Travis narrates. And AI does not have that appeal. The AI does not have a following. AI does not have a connection with an audience like narrators do. And then the other thing is, I've been, kind of, at least in the indie community, authors talking about AI. I've been listening on some other platforms to hear what people are saying. And it seems like indie authors that really don't have any money are considering AI, just so they can get their book in audio. But most want to use a human narrator. Like if they can afford it, they want to use a human narrator. Or they're like, well, maybe I'll use I until I make enough money that I can afford a human narrator, and I'll replace the audiobook with a human. So, but generally speaking, authors don't want to be replaced by AI. Yeah. And they don't really want to replace their audiobooks with AI either. So I don't know. I don't know
And
how.
you may have already lost your audience at that point. So if you use your front list moment, your simultaneous release, if you waste it with an AI voice and a bunch of people are like, I can't connect, there may not be a second wave for you when you finally are ready to hire your narrator. So there's risks involved, I think, in adopting new technology that is inhuman, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering that question with your insights. That's been amazing. The thing that really worries me the most about AI is I heard that Ford Motor Company now has patented something where they can self AI repossess your car for non-payments. That's interesting. And by the way, last thing, I would pay good money to hear my good friend Byron, who's on stage, narrate the phone book.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, for your question, and appreciate your answers. I did invite Byron up on stage. I noticed in his profile, if you click on anybody's icon, you can see their profile, and noticed he was an audiobook narrator. So Byron, welcome to the stage. I didn't know if you had a question or if you'd like to provide any insight or any comments.
Well, I was just lurking, but I have a medical problem known as Swiss watchmaker syndrome. So you asked me what time it is, and first we have to build the watch. So if you want me to give some brief comments about previous experiences that I've had with technology that's disruptive and how it maps across to AI for audiobooks, I'd be happy to.
Sure.
Okay. So I've been through these kinds of, very disruptive discontinuities in terms of technology before, and people tend to forget them. And, I'm actually ancient enough that I remember tubes versus transistors and manual versus automated multi-track mixdown for music and hand-drawn cell-based animation versus 3D and analog versus digital audio and video and film-based versus digital photography and even ATMs versus internet banking, bank tellers versus ATMs initially. And what has happened, what's really interesting to me is I was involved originally back in 84, 85 with the transition to what's now called, or what was called at the time, desktop publishing. Now it's just publishing. And the result of all of these scary transitions has tended to be a massive expansion of demand and market size because of newfound convenience. If you don't have to pay $150 a page to have something typeset, well, then more people are interested in doing it. When you figure out that the thing that is, common to most business communication is the Xerox machine, then anything more than 300 DPI was a waste for those kinds of applications. So then what happens is you get this temporary abundance of laughably terrible results. Remember the ransom note documents that everybody had with 20 typefaces when the Mac and the image writer were released? And eventually what you have is a material uptick in the quality of the average output and a hugely increased fundamental appreciation and monetary value for genuine skill and craft in the art. So has anybody here paid $8 for a killer artisanal loaf of bread lately? I mean, I have, and I was happy with the return on the investment. So the market is clearly profit driven, not a meritocracy. So, I suggested an opportunity to the guys at Positron. So they now have been building, with the code name of Hot Dog or No Hot Dog as a tribute to an HBO series, an AI detector as a profit center, which they're going to make available for free to narrators. And they will charge the appropriate amount of money to people, who are in the distribution business or publishers to make sure that the stuff that they get and continue to distribute are in fact done by humans. So the bottom line of all of this is that the transition period is going to be rough for a lot of people, particularly the ones on Fiverr and Upwork and the low end, who will not necessarily have the skills or the training to be able to progress and adapt. But eventually, consumers will be more educated and willing to pay more for quality product. So, it's going to be neither Chicken Little nor the zombie apocalypse. And in the meantime, it's going to be very disruptive. Sorry, end of rant.
Thank you. Thank you for your input, Brian. I appreciate that. And I see that Debbie has joined us on stage as well. And welcome, Debbie. Did you have a question or a comment for our panelists about audiobook production?
Hi, thanks, guys. Yeah, I do have a question for all of you. I'm an avid audiobook listener, and question for you guys. So you all three narrate, but you also do the back end part with the production. And I'm wondering, does it change the way you approach and prepare to be the narrator of a book now that with your back end production experience? Does that factor in to how you approach it? And a couple questions, I guess. So does an audiobook narrator do research or preparation to narrate a book? And how much time does that entail? And what does that look like?
I narrate not as much as I used to, just because my production company's busy, but I still do narrate. And I don't know if it's a totally different hat being a producer as opposed to being a narrator. I don't know if it's changed my narrating by being a producer. Maybe not. But preparation, sure. Narrators do their own prep, or they can hire it out. Some people that are really busy hire preppers, hire researchers to maybe look up words, or most narrators at least read the book before they sit down and start. I do, unless it's a series and I'm kind of into the series and I know the characters already and I've already been in this world for a few books, and then I don't worry so much about reading it first. I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but yeah, sometimes I don't, or sometimes I skim it, or I don't know. But most of the time, yeah, you read the book and you do your own prep. That's the common.
The amount of prep really varies from like kind of book genre or whether it's nonfiction or fiction or how technical it might be. If you're reading a fantasy book from an author who made up all the words and they give you carte blanche to pronounce them however you want, then, you don't need to do a ton of research on languages. But if you're reading something that's historical fiction that's set in very specific places with specific dialects, then you're going to want to research pronunciations and, particulars of like an accent, for instance, so that you can reproduce them well. But it's going to vary really widely from thing to thing. As far as changes to narration based on like production, I'm definitely cognizant of things that affect engineering. For instance, I'll just use punching as an example. So when we use punch and roll, when you punch in, you might punch in the middle of a breath. And if you do so, you get this weird chopped breath sound where the audio transitioned from what was there before to what you've now recorded. That's something an engineer has to deal with. But if you're aware of that, then there are things that you might do in your narration to minimize the appearance of such a thing. You might always hold your breath if you know you're about at the end of a line, if you know you're going to have to punch in. Well, I really flubbed that. I'm going to hold my breath and, I'll make sure that this next punch is clean. Or you'll be cognizant of where you punch in to take care of that. So some awareness of what happens on the back end can make other people's lives easier.
Yeah, I agree with you, Travis. I do agree with you. And I think it's because when I first started in audiobooks, I was like doing everything myself. I was like doing my own editing and all this, and it took forever. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so hard. Now I don't do anything like that. I'd have, a team of people, but I'm still aware of the work that goes in. And in a way, I'm kind of glad that I started by learning everything, by all the elements. I mean, I could still do it if I had to, but you know, it does make you aware of what everybody's workload looks like. So I think that is it does, you're right. It does change the narration. I do think about post-production a lot.
I think I thought about post-production more when I didn't know as much about it. So I was very finicky as a narrator. I'd be like, a noise, you know. I'd stop every time. I'm sure I drove everyone crazy, but I was like, but then other people would be like, wow, your recordings are really perfect. But the cost was too high. The toll that it took on my brain, taking me out of the story, and also the extra time it took to stop. Like every time there's a tiny little, you know, like lip smack or whatever. So, and I actually had a different experience. My first 50 or 100 books, they would fly me to Michigan to record, or I'd go down to, I'd go basically from Van Nuys down the freeway and record at PRH. And so I had this was just sort of when I started and what the customs were at that time. I always had a director. And so I really learned a lot from the directors that I was able to carry with me into my directing work. Then I had a period where I did like, I don't know, another 160 books or 200 books, like just me in my really noisy living room. I ended up renting a place at a professional building, and that like a commercial studio, because I couldn't take living behind a dojo and all the people dropping off their kids and all the noise. So that actually helped facilitate my move to, you know, production, because I was already in that professional environment. But I will say that my narration, I don't narrate a whole ton anymore. I still do children's books, and I have I do the Judy Moody and Stink series, which is so much fun for kids. And I have a couple of cozy mysteries and sweet romance lines that I still do. But I will say that directing and engineering other narrators really changed me, because it loosened me up. I'd think, I'd try and stop them, or I would have stopped them for something. And then I realized I don't have to, because what they're doing is so connected to what they did before and what's coming after. It's a deep involvement in story and a fluidity to the way they're telling it. If there's a tiny little vocal bobble or smack in the middle of that, it's not worth stopping them, because what they're doing is infinitely more valuable than perfection, which again is something that AI can't accomplish. It's sanitized, right? But what they're doing is something that's more valuable. The narrators, by staying in the moment of the story, it's more valuable than a kind of artificial perfection, whether that's done by AI or by, like, say, me being too fussy, because they're engaging us in the story. And you find you maybe have a little extra smacky narrator. You don't notice after 10 minutes if they're pulling you into the story. Or maybe they emphasize something in a way that's acceptable, but maybe not optimal. And it doesn't matter, because in the world of the story they're creating, if they've drawn you in and you're living there during the time that you're listening, some of the other imperfections don't matter, and in some way they're more sort of organic. So I really loosened up quite a bit when I started directing other tremendously talented and experienced narrators. I was like, oh, I see what's happening here. So that really changed for me.
Thank you all. And thank you for your question, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was really insightful. And honestly, for me personally, it can make or break my read experience depending on the narrators. So I really appreciate everything. And I'm listening to all your voices thinking, can I hear you in a book? And I think I can. So thanks, guys.
Thank you,
And
Debbie.
these guys narrate their own books too. So look for their names as authors as well as narrators.
I think we've all written a book. I'm on my third book, but we've all written. Travis, you've got one book?
Yeah, I've got one out and the other's done. So
Yeah. And they're hugely successful too. Mine is a graphic novel for children, so you probably will not be hearing me narrate it. But I'm happy it's on the market.
That's so wonderful, you guys. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I know we're running out of time, and I feel like we have so many more questions for you guys, but maybe we can close out with each of you either sharing if you want to read a brief segment from something if you'd like to do that, or if you'd like to talk about a book you've written, or just closing thoughts, something that you haven't said that you'd like to talk about before we go. Maybe each of you can share just a few minutes.
I have something sort of locked and loaded that I think is relevant to, because I think it's mostly authors on here. So my little parting word will be, should you or should you not narrate your own audiobook? And I have a couple of sort of rules of thumb. One is, if it's nonfiction, maybe. If it's fiction, not unless you have just as much, if not more, training than a professional narrator, and experience on stage and voiceover and all of that, because that narrator is going to bring, an extra 25, 50, 75% of prowess and engagement to that book. If you are doing your own nonfiction book, my rule of thumb is, if you have an audience, like a built-in audience. I had one guy who had a terrible voice, like a sledgehammer, and he really struggled with reading, but he had 1 million subscribers to his podcast, and they were deeply invested in him as a person and his voice as an entity, that they already felt like friends. They were friends with him and his voice. And so in that case, it was essential that he do it, because people were relying on the experience of him. But otherwise, I would say I highly advise you to leave it to the professionals.
Thank you. Great advice, Amy. Erin?
I was trying to think. Well, my last book that came out in September is called More With You. It's a literary romance, if you're into that. The other thing, I guess, like a little word of advice for authors, if you're having your audiobook done, whether it's with a big publisher or indie or ACX or whatever, if there's something that that in your mind you've pronounced it a certain way for the 3 years that you wrote your book, let your producer or your narrator know. Most narrators get pretty good. We now know, there's a million ways to pronounce ELANA. But sometimes it gets past a narrator and they just say, like, oh, that's my mom's name and it's Alana. But you've written this book and, you've spent your 5 years of your life on it and you've said Elena in your mind. And then you get the book and it's done and it's finished. And they said Alana, 672 times. And it's over. It's finished. And it's not going to be changed. So if you have something like that in your book, really kind of think about it. Like, maybe read a chapter out loud to yourself and maybe consider those things, because a lot of times, like, we do ask those questions. But again, sometimes the narrator just goes, yeah, that's my mom's name. They can't think of it any other way. So if you have specific pronunciation requests, state them up front before it's finished.
Good thing to keep in mind. Thank you, Erin. Travis?
So I guess I'm going to give some advice. I talk to a lot of indies, and one thing that sometimes happens is that indies are working on having their books be successful. Maybe they're early on, they just haven't had something that's hitting yet, or it's not making its return. And they're hopeful that audio will reverse that it will be to the book's benefit and really make it a hit, especially if they get a good narrator who's well known. And my experience with that is that usually that's not the case. Usually you want to make your book successful first. And that if you've got a bad cover and your blurb is not working and you've only sold 30 copies, that laying out the cash for a narrator and hoping that they are going to reverse that is, I think, in most circumstances, not valid. So my advice usually to them is to invest in your book first. And so if you haven't got a proper edit, if you got a cover on Fiverr and nobody's picking it up on Amazon, dropping $2 or $3 on the audiobook very seldom has like a backfilling effect on the book's success to make it more successful. So in those cases, my advice is usually to worry about the book first. That sounds stupid coming from a narrator who gets paid to read audiobooks, but as an author, I want you to be successful. with your book as a whole. And that's usually what I advise in those situations, because it's not hard to go to some of the best known narrators in the world and see a book that has absolutely no star ratings because the book never sold either, and they're not able to overcome that hump for you. They can absolutely be a force multiplier if you have reached a certain like threshold and you've like broken orbit, but they can't kind of bring it up from nothing. I hope that's not
Thank
too
you.
much downer advice.
But important advice. Thank you, Travis. And I know we've run out of time. We could listen to you guys all night long, but we can still listen to you by getting your books on audio or reading them. So a special thank you to Amy Rubinate, Erin Spencer, and Travis Baldree for braving the first in our ever Audiobook Narrators series. You guys were brave to be the guinea pigs in our first one. Thank you. And our next week, our next part 2 is Indie Audiobook Success Stories with Neil Helligers, Terry Schnaubelt, Joe Arden, and Andy Arndt. So we hope you will join us next Thursday on Fireside. And I'm just going to hang on just a minute. I'm just going to join you back on stage for a minute because I want to show you on March 15th, we have Broadway singer Mary Satrakian, who's going to be talking about her book, Finding Your Inner Voice. She's going to be doing voice hearing, so she can read your thoughts from your voice. She's going to talk about her experience coaching some of the world-renowned celebrities and high profiles, such as Nicole Kidman, who she coached to sing for Moulin Rouge. So join us then. And if you want to follow Amy, Erin, or Travis, you can click on their icon on Fireside and follow them so that anytime they're on the program, you will get notice of that. But maybe they could share us also where we can find you. Are you on social media? Quick, before we log off, Erin, Travis, and Amy, can you let us know where people can find you?
My company's website is www.onenightstandstudios.com. We're on One Night Stand Studios is on all the socials. I have to say I'm not that active on social media. I'm burnt out on it. But I'm there. I check it occasionally. But yeah, go to my website. You can always email me from there. That's it.
Thank you,
My
Erin.
website is travisbaldree.com, and I'm on pretty much every social media. Always is Travis Baldree. Twitter is probably where I'm most active.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Amy?
I think Amy had to jump off.
She did. Okay. All right. Well, on behalf of all our listeners, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Travis. And as always, you can check us out at adventuresbythebook.com, where we host virtual events, in-person events. We just finished our big Superbook event. Speaking of audiobook narrators, we had Julia Whalen as our keynote speaker. It was really fun. And we're going to be doing, if you're in Sonoma, the wine region, we're doing an 8-book and author wine and book pairing in April. So I hope you check out our website, adventuresbythebook.com, and follow us on Fireside by clicking on my icon and following me. So thank you again to Erin, Travis, and Amy, and to all our audience members for joining us today. And until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.